Hello. We are starting to go live. Very exciting. Amazing. We're just going to let a couple of people join us. Hello, how are you? Hello. Fantastic. I'm so excited about today. Honestly, I am thrilled to be online doing a live, but also sharing some of the information that we're going to be talking about today is genuinely very exciting. All right. When the clock turns the hour, we will get going. Very exciting. Just checking all our systems are working. Amazing. Well, first of all, welcome everybody for what is going to be 45 minutes to an hour of, I hope, really exciting, interesting information about my new book, Beat Burnout, but more importantly, about the story of burnout, what's happening in that world right now, how it has come about, and starting to lay some of the foundations for how you can fix burnout or start to get on a journey of recovery back from where you were. And you know, if I think back in my own journey of burnout, it's a really nice way of starting the story to talk about the symptoms and the signs that you might start recognizing in yourself or others to be aware of what burnout is. So I'm going to start there, but before I do, let's just clarify, what is burnout? Because a lot of us think burnout might be, oh, I'm stressed out, or I'm tired out, or I'm worn out. And the reality is, it isn't those things. It's all of those things stacked on top of each other. Burnout tends to happen to people who work hard. They're very determined. They're very committed. They really want to do a good job. And they've got big commitments and expectations of themselves at home, at work, in their social lives, in their friendship groups, in their community groups. And gradually, all of those things start to stack up until it becomes too much. And if I think back to my own life, I burned out in 2017. And what I felt when I burned out was a pretty horrible situation. You know, I was working in a very busy GM role, running an 8-figure business with a team of about 40 people, traveling the world, doing lots of meetings, doing all the things, at the same time doing an MBA, at the same time trying to manage a relationship, at the same time trying to renovate houses. And you can imagine how this life looked. It was pretty chaotic and there wasn't a lot of time to spare. But I also found that in the work situation, I was really struggling to create and find a purpose in what we were doing. Everything I was trying to do just seemed almost meaningless to me. It seemed as though we were just playing whack-a-mole. And the idea of let's do something really meaningful became harder and harder to see behind office politics, behind endless meetings, and behind all the other things that were going on. And it started to make me feel like there were more bad days than good days. And I felt sad about that. And also, a lot of the people around me were also struggling and were starting to leave. There were people being signed off for mental health reasons. There were people who were starting to evacuate the organization or leave the organization because they couldn't deal with the way they were being treated and the endless issues that every time you opened a can of worms, there was another can of worms inside it. It became exhausting. The challenges really started to stack up for me when there was a legislative change in our organization that meant that the bottom line, that was essentially the cash cow business unit for the organization, was suddenly halved. A political decision was made which meant that the way we acquired our customers was not available to us. And so immediately there was this enormous challenge of, well, we need to find some way of making up the shortfall, but we can't do anything too risky because we're a responsible organization. So we have to keep it really safe and do the same thing. And at the same time as that, I was also leaning on, I guess, everybody around me to work harder and push harder and produce the results, and also never took a day off. So if we look at some of those symptoms, I was exhausted. I woke up one morning and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. My brain was so weary. I was so physically exhausted. I was living on a diet of caffeine and junk food and red wine to try and to get through the days. And the sports and the hobbies had gone out the window. I really felt like I was just on a hamster on a wheel, just grinding and grinding and grinding away, just trying to go through each day. And eventually I got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore. My brain was like, it was like wading through mental treacle or being stuck in quicksand. It was really difficult to make a decision or to think clearly or to decide. And by the time I'd had a few cups of coffee or some Coke Zero to get me going, I was sort of running at about 50%. But I also noticed that some of my decision quality was starting to reduce down. I wasn't able to cope as well. And so I made the decision to leave that organization because I realized I just could not keep going. And I spent the last 6 years working out what all those things were that were going on, what was causing them, how they were working, and how to fix them. And I'll tell you more about that later. But one of the things I've really discovered in my journey of going through this burnout experience as a personal sufferer and now working with organizations around the world to help them fix it is this is a significant issue. This is a $150 billion issue in the US alone, not to mention all the other countries around the world. And, I was having dinner in a restaurant in Mexico last night, and a lady across the table from me said, I'm leaving my job because I'm burning out. And I thought, also, this is a problem in Mexico as well. This isn't just a Western problem. This is a universal issue. And it got me thinking, what's going on here? Because the more people I've spoken to over the last 6 years, and the reason I ended up starting my business was because there seems to be so many people burning out. And the rationale here is perhaps it's a leadership problem. Perhaps it's a problem with leaders. Well, is it? Perhaps it's a me problem. Perhaps I'm the one to blame and I couldn't deal with life well enough myself, and maybe I was the one that was at fault. Maybe it's all those people around me who are super frustrating and not letting me do the things I want to do. But the reality is we're all doing the best we can with what we have. And what I've seen over the research phase of building the book was that we are doing the best with what we can, with what we have, but we're also massively overloaded with information. Even in the marketing space, we get hit with over 10,000 pieces of marketing a day, whether it's brand messaging, social media, whatever it might be. I read a fascinating statistic that we process on a daily basis 4 times as much data as our parents processed in a month. You can imagine the amount of volume, the tidal wave of stuff that's coming at us when we're experiencing that. We then have all these situations around us, the media, social media, the news, telling us that we have to do better. You have to look fitter, you have to be stronger, you have to eat better, you have to perform higher. Here's these aspirational things that you might want in the commercial sector. And so we're all gunning for this financial success. We're all running on a treadmill trying to speed up and speed up and speed up. And that's okay when you only have one of those things to do. But then you overlay maybe a global pandemic, which put people under immense stress to readjust the way they live their lives and how they live with their families and how they did their caregiver duties and how they manage their hobbies and their social lives and their professional lives and their teams. And you add another plate to start spinning. Then maybe you start to overlay some financial difficulties, whether people are losing jobs or struggling to stay in their jobs, whether their organizations are starting to feel some financial pain and making some cuts. And what we see in the talent market certainly is organizations struggling to recruit people, but the work not slowing down. And so you have these super committed people who are continuing to keep going. They're like, I have to fulfill, and the manager's asked me to fill that gap just temporarily, but that temporarily becomes the permanent. And increasingly, because of this massive amount of data and the increased workload and the extra plates that we're having to spin, we're also experiencing a massive amount of volatility, of uncertainty, of complexity and ambiguity in the lives that we are living. And that puts a massive cognitive strain. It's like standing in a room with death metal playing really, really loud and trying to do a maths problem. There's a lot of noise in the background that we're trying to block out, and that takes mental energy. And so what we need to do is to realize that the burnout pandemic that a lot of us are feeling and experiencing right now is potentially down to a combination of factors that is different for everybody. And so I went through this last 5 years trying to systematize or framework those common problems that we're all facing and turn them into a solution map of some sort, turn them into a way of fixing that. The other piece that we get is leaders today are experiencing one of the lowest investments in leadership development training that we've ever seen in history. That's not a generalization. That is a specific in the organizations that I've experienced and I've worked with. They've kind of cut budgets and cut budgets and cut budgets, and there's bigger expectations on the leaders, but less training. Maybe there's a course or some online learning, but that one-to-one coaching context, those really rich, deep conversations that actually make the biggest difference aren't happening because everybody's too busy. And so the opportunities to head something off at the pass and protect a team from a manager who might be struggling and not really understanding their role very clearly is causing an issue. Equally, the world we are operating in is more complex. We have hybrid workplaces, we have remote working now, we have staff who are in different countries. The complexity of what we have to do as a leader is far more significant than our parents' generation. But the leadership development training that's been on offer is generally pretty similar to the stuff that was rolled out in the 90s and early 2000s. And so there's a fit for purpose context here that we have to answer and say, well, one of the reasons maybe leaders are feeling like they're burning out is because they're unprepared and undertrained. And one of the reasons teams might be feeling like they're burned out is because they're not getting the support they need from their leader because the leader is underprepared and undertrained. So we've got a combination of factors here. Equally, I mentioned that idea of being the hamster on the wheel of success. Well, what does success look like? And if we just pause for a moment and you write down what is your definition of success? If you were to say, I feel super successful, what's on your list? And from experience, having done this a number of times over the last few years, the first thing that comes to mind is something related to money. Whether it's the size of your bank balance, whether it's the size of your salary, whether it's the amount of money that you have left at the end of the month, whether it's the freedom that you've created from that money, but it tends to come down to money. And from research, we've seen that money is the new natural selection medium. So before it used to be survival of the fittest by were you the best hunter, the fastest runner, the best provider. But now it's come down to a story about money. And so for many of us, when we think about success, it's that definition around my house, my car, my possessions, my holiday home, my holidays abroad, whatever it might be, but it's money related. And then we slow people down a little bit and say, well, what else would success look like? And again, take a moment to think for yourself. If you had all the money in the world and money was not an object, how would you define your success? Maybe you define it by the type of partner you are. Maybe you define it by how much time you get to spend with your kids and your family. Maybe it's how good a surfer you are. Certainly, my business coach defines a successful day by the number of hours he manages to go surfing on that day. I would love to define my success by the number of scuba dives I can get in a year. But the reality is we're not. We're stuck in this trap of success is based on money. And because that success is based on money and keeping my job and paying my mortgage and feeding my family, and these are all very worthwhile things, I'm not belittling them in any way, but because they're based on those things, we become the hamster on the wheel. And one of the first things that we do when we see high pressure, high stress individuals is they're working long hours and they're giving up their personal time. You know, in my story about 2017, I didn't take a day off in 2.5 years. I very rarely took weekends off because even if I wasn't working on work stuff, I was working on MBA stuff. So there was just no downtime. I would always give up my sports, my hobbies, my friends, those dinners out, those sports evenings, all those things that you do that actually help you recharge. I was giving them all up. What about if your success was just getting home safe every day? I work with many organizations, and one of their measures of success is that they don't have any accidents. They don't have any workplace health and safety incident. Everybody goes home to their families every night. And health and safety and mental health and well-being are becoming significant issues in the workplace. And we're starting to pay real attention, which is fantastic. But there are a lot of people out there who are really struggling because their definition of their own success, or maybe even their own survival, is based around money, not around getting home safely. And they're heaping this pressure on themselves. I had a fascinating conversation on LinkedIn this morning with a high-achieving member of a professional services firm. And she's been going hard for many, many years. But because she's a high-achieving person, she wants to be a high-achieving mum. She wants to be a high-achieving member of the firm. She wants to be a great friend. She wants to be a successful sports person, and is consistently putting all this pressure on herself to do more and more and more. And what we see in burnout, it's people who care. It's your highly engaged, highly motivated, high performance anxiety, like I have to do a good job because I'll beat myself up if I don't. They're the ones that burn out. But they're also the people that are probably leading your organization, right? And again, some fascinating data that came up was that actually our senior leaders in organizations are burning out more than more junior members of the organization, because the senior leaders are feeling like, well, I have to hold it together. I have to be the example. I have to be the brave face as we go through this hard experience, through COVID, through dealing with it, through recessions, through supply chain crises. I have to be the brave face. And so they're bringing it all at work because they feel like they have to. And they're creating this ecosystem of hamster on the wheel because they're always on, they're always available, they're working weekends, they're working evenings, they're always coming back for more and more and more. And every time a manager sends an email at 3 a.m. because they're awake, because they feel like they have to keep it together, that creates a whole tail of response emails and meetings and projects and extra work being spooled up. So the reality here is that our leaders are struggling because they also want to be successful, and they're also highly driven to create an ecosystem of burnout in their own organization, not intentionally, but because they're trying to do a great job. So then what if we could redefine success as that getting home safely, being a great member of our family, having time for our hobbies, turning our laptops off, and actually taking some time out. And it's that old adage of go slow to go fast. Because I mentioned earlier, my decision quality started to really struggle when I started to feel some of those real symptoms of burnout. I struggled to think clearly. I struggled to absorb data as effectively as I had before. And it was just because I was mentally exhausted. And if you're feeling those things, one of the things we notice and we talk about in the workshops that we do is that making good decisions is one of the key leadership traits for differentiating high potential and low potential leaders. But people who are burned out struggle to make a decision, and definitely struggle to make a good decision. And so what we want to do is just slow that thing down. And by creating this ecosystem of being always on, you don't allow it to slow down. One of the top tips that we give to people immediately when we start meeting them is 1 day a week, book yourself a personal appointment, whether it be meeting a friend for a drink, whether it be going to the library, doing some sports, whatever your personal appointment is. And don't say personal appointment, say meeting with so-and-so, because then it can't be booked over. And don't give that one appointment away, and just take some time away from the office to let your brain start to recharge. And chapter 5 in the book is all about downtime and managing downtime effectively. But what we need to do is just slow the tempo down. And it can feel impossible to do. When you're in the midst of it, it can feel impossible. But actually what we see is when we do take that night off, things just start to assimilate, and we start to be able to see things a little bit more clearly, and we can make some better decisions about what the priority is tomorrow. Not coming in tired, relying on caffeine, so we're over-caffeinated, and trying to work out, oh, how do I do all the things, because I can't decide which one is the most important and the most pressing. Another thing that we can start to redefine success by is starting to write out an ideal life by design. And this is something I did back in 2017. I was in the midst of this burnout, nervous breakdown, really serious health issues, and I said, this is the life I want to have, and these are the things that's going to look like. And then starting to compare current life to life by design and just starting to shift one small thing at a time, because it can be really difficult to go, well, here's my list of 50 things and I don't have time to do even 5 of them. But what about if one of them was good? So the turning the laptop off at 5 p.m. Maybe it's that I want to have dinner with my kids. I want to take my children to school once a week. Maybe it's I want to meet with my friends and play football on a Sunday. Whatever it is that's the thing for you, the small thing, try and work on one small thing first. Because the secret to beating burnout and reaching high performance is not significant shifts and significant changes. You're not going to shift burnout in one move. It's a series of 100 small moves that start to compound and stack up on each other. And we've seen this in a variety of pieces of literature. But essentially the idea of the compound interest is if you change something 1% every day of the year, by the end of the year, you've 38x'd your performance. So the whole premise of the book and everything we talk about in our practice is how do we create these little 1% shifts that are imperceptibly small, commonsensically easy, but that actually really make a difference. Another thing you can do as a leader is to start really thinking about, so we're operating in this really volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment, and I'm not really sure either, is to start being a little bit more vulnerable with your team and saying to them, hey, look, team, I'm have some ideas, but I want to get your input and then I'll make some decisions about this. And through doing that, through having those conversations, you not only reduce your own stress levels and expectations on yourself, but you also start to build trust and security and connection with your team, so they feel like, oh, my manager really cares about my opinion and my voice is heard and I'm feeling good about that. And by doing this, we start to create 4 positive aspects, which is vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. Because if we're having these active conversations about, well, this is what we need to achieve and I'm not sure how we're going to do it, and what do you think, and let's bring in some new ideas, and then here's what I've basically decided as a result of our conversation, let me brief you back on that. Everybody's understanding why we've talked about that, what we've come to, and hopefully we'll understand the reason why you've chosen that thing. They'll then be clearer, they'll have more purpose in the work they do, and they'll be able to react faster because they'll see the big picture. So we turn this VUCA world of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous into vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. And doesn't that sound better, right? Well, we've got a team who know what they're doing, why they're doing it, how to do it, and can react to any speed bumps that come along. It can be really important. So I've taken all of this background story of the journey that I went on when I burned out, some of the reasons and the impacts of that in the business market today across a number of organizations in a variety of countries. This is not a small thing in pockets of society. This is a global challenge that we're working hard to overcome. And we wrote a book about it. And the book is simply made up of 5 chapters, because we managed to boil everything down from 5 years research and 5 years of writing into 5 chapters. And those 5 chapters, essentially imagine it like a spectrum from burnout to high performance. And all we need to do is just move you along that spectrum. And those 5 chapters are creating purpose. We always start with purpose. And many of you have downloaded the sample chapter, which is talking all about purpose. The second chapter talks about abundance. But basically, how do we stop people running scared and feeling like imposters and being in the fight or flight situation and move them into a really positive mindset so they can do their best work? How do we do that for you, and how do you do that for your team? The third chapter is all about the idea of connection. We are tribal animals. We grew up, our evolution is such that if you were in a pack or a tribe or a group, you were far more likely to survive. You could share the labor, you could watch out for dangers, and you could hunt together. And so your genes were more likely to pass on than those individuals and lone wolves. And so over time, we've become predisposed to being good at operating in tribes, social strata, structure, communications, all these amazing things. But that means in the business workplace, we need to help people integrate and work in that tribe. So chapter 3 talks all about how do we integrate people into the tribe, how do we connect them with the plan, and how do we keep them growing and learning so they can solve more complex problems and do more complex things to take a bit of weight off you so you can focus on the things that you want to focus on. Otherwise, you're the leader doing their job and your job. The third chapter is all around the idea of trying new things. You know, if you're in a world of burnout right now and you keep doing what you're doing, chances are that you are going to end up burned out because the patterns, the behaviors, the choices and the decisions you're making are not serving you, clearly because you're burning out. So we need to do some stuff differently, and it starts with getting curious. And so we talk all about the idea of curiosity and also how curiosity can start to stoke innovation and product development, service development, improve productivity, improve all sorts of other things, including well-being, and how to access that in your team. And then the final chapter is all around downtime. So downtime is not just taking 2 weeks on vacation. Downtime is structured, is planned, and is done in a way that is little and often. Because what we need to do is allow our brains to recharge a little bit, to let those chemicals that have been burned, all the sugars that have been burned up in our minds, we want them to essentially calm down a little bit and be swept through by our blood flow and our brains to become a bit clearer. And if you're struggling with that hazy brain, you can't make decisions, you feel like you're in mental treacle and the day is a bit of a grind, you're in a bit of a blur, that overwhelm is there, it's because you're potentially not taking enough structured downtime in the right way. And downtime doesn't involve alcohol and drugs and 2 weeks on vacation. Those won't fix it, unfortunately. I wish they would, but they don't. We spent the last 5 years working with organizations all over the world, testing little pieces of each of these bits of research to try and essentially work out which were the ones that make the biggest difference. And they were the ones that ended up in the book. And each of them starts with a very simple conversation. You know, again, it's the law of the 1%. You don't need to go and do a massive new thing because chances are you probably haven't got the energy and time to do that anyway. What we're looking for are these little conversations that you can have that start to stack up on one another. And the entire book, all of the research was deliberately sequenced in the book. So you start with purpose and you focus on that first. And then you finish with downtime and you focus on that last. Now, that doesn't mean you can't dip into the book in various places. Absolutely you can. But what I recommend is you work through it in order and eat it in bite-sized chunks. We wrote it in bite-sized chunks, and at the end of every section of the book, and there's about 3 or 4 sections per chapter, so they're small, there's a series of action tips which tell you how to do the things we're suggesting you do. And, you know, the way that we structured the book came off the back of one of these. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced one of these food delivery services, but this is a recipe card. It's a really cool idea. On the front of it, it shows you what success looks like. This is your beautiful dish, and this one is spiced cauliflower and pomegranate salad. Sounds yummy. On the back, it tells you all the things you need to make this pomegranate and spiced cauliflower salad. And then here, it gives you all the instructions. And what we did during the course of making the book was essentially emulate that idea. So all of the book is, here's what success looks like, and then at the end of the section, here's how to do that. Because again, you've probably not got the headspace to think, well, how am I going to do that? How am I going to adapt that to my context? How am I going to work that in my team? I've got an offsite coming up. How am I going to make that work? Or in the monthly meeting that we have as a team, I'm not sure how to plan it. So we just made it really easy for you. And what we built was a leader's playbook that you can literally grab, skim through the pages, read the content, and there's a mixture of case studies, stories, a little bit of science, but not to bamboozle you, just to explain things to make it really simple to understand. And then there's these action tips, which just mean bringing it to life. We wanted to make this easy. We wanted to provide the resource that I wish I'd had 6 years ago that wasn't available. There was no guide to beat burnout. There was no guide to building a high-performance culture that was super down-to-earth and practical. It was always either high-performance sports related, or psychology and neuroscience related, and there was nothing kind of sitting in between. So we've been trying all these things for the last 5 years. We've made this book, which is essentially a series of 5 chapters of distilled activity. It is a really, really interesting read. And the goal here is to help you stay working, keep paying your mortgage, keep allocating the small amount of energy you've got to those compound growths, and to start turning the boat around, shifting the emphasis away from burnout towards high performance, and doing the same thing with your team. So the key piece here is we really want your team to go on this journey with you, because they're probably feeling the same thing as you are. They're probably struggling as much as you are, but maybe you're not seeing it because you're so caught up in your own burnout right now that you haven't got time and headspace to think about them. So we encourage you to have those conversations in a nice, easy, open format. And it starts with the baby steps. Just be a little bit vulnerable. Team, this is what I'm thinking. I wonder how we might achieve this together. Now, the book is available from today. And I can't believe I'm actually saying that. It's available right now. And you can go to the website and get it. And I'll pop up a link in a few minutes so you can know where to go. But what I do encourage you to do is to think about, what could this mean to you if you could solve burnout? Could you achieve that success factor that isn't money, but actually is the things you love doing again? Could you get back to feeling great about life, there being more good days than bad days? Could you reconnect with your hobbies and your friends? Could you get that promotion that you've been striving for, yearning for, but just seems to be just out of reach? Somebody else gets promoted, or there's a restructure and that job no longer exists. Maybe you don't have the time and energy to go out through an external recruitment process to find a new job, so you're just kind of staying where you are, treading water, hoping to survive. What if you could suddenly activate all those high performance benefits that those people around you are benefiting from? They're getting the promotions, they're getting the pay rises, they seem to be enjoying the holidays and the time off and the friends and family and the hobbies, and you're not quite sure how they're doing it, but you really want to access that. You used to be able to do it, but for some reason now you can't. What would it be like if you could get rid of that mental haziness, the overwhelm, the extreme exhaustion, and just the, oh my God, I can't wait to get home and have a drink, and I need a coffee in the morning to get going. Wouldn't it be great to be able to jump out of bed and be excited about the day because you're looking forward to going working with a team of amazing people who are doing incredible work that you can see the difference it's making? That's what we want to give you. This isn't a self-help book. This isn't some mental guru stuff. This is down-to-earth practical help from somebody who's been there, who literally lost everything and had to start again and decided to put that down to help others. That's what we're trying to give you. So if you're interested in that, please do head over to jimmyburrows.com/book and take advantage of the early bird offer. There's also some other stuff in there which I think you might be interested in, but please do grab it. That offer is open for 48 hours. And if I leave you with nothing else today, it's the idea that you can come back from burnout. It's hard to do it if you don't know the way back. If you are in a pattern of behaviors and you can't work out what to do next, maybe it's worth $4.99 just to have a look at somebody who's done it and has worked it out and then is now sharing that with large organizations all over the world. And that's not to blow my own trumpet, that's not to toot my own horn. It's to say, if you're feeling desperate, maybe this will help. Now, the reason we're doing it as a digital format is also interesting because, some people like a hard copy book. One of the pieces we found during our research phase was that one of the tendencies we tend to do is when we just mentally exhausted, burning out, and we want to switch off, we grab our phones and we go into Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, or we just scroll mindlessly because the phone is always there. And so when we were deciding how we were going to roll the book out and deploy it, we thought a digital format would actually be best, because what we want to do is make sure this is with you all the time. It's searchable, it's indexed. You can find things in there if you grab the PDF or if you grab the ebook versions. you can scroll through, you can control F and find the section you want to work on, the action tips you're looking for, the story you want to get back to and share with your team that day. And it's always with you. So instead of going into Instagram or instead of going into Facebook, you can read this book to actually take some practical steps to help yourself. So we've led with a digital format first. And this is going to be available at the early bird price for the next 48 hours. And then the price goes up. But I encourage you just to take a look, see if it can make a difference to you. And I hope it helps. So that's everything we've got for you in terms of what we wanted to share about the book. I'm very happy to invite any questions from anybody watching. We have had a couple already I can see come through on the other platforms. So let me quickly see if I can pop those up. So first question that's come through, and it looks like it's putting my name, but it's not from me, is if we're trying to work out if burnout is an issue in our company, what are some of the other metrics we could look for? Okay, so I think, what are some of the other metrics we could look for? So what I think we're trying to say here is if we can't confirm that burnout's a thing, because nobody really talks about being burned out in public because there's a bit of a shame attached to it, and maybe a bit of people don't want to admit to not having the gas in the tank. So we're saying, well, what could we look for in other ways that are going to help us determine if burnout is a challenge? And what I would say is you've got some amazing rich data probably in your HR or your personnel or your P&P or your P&C functions, which can give you some indications. For example, you might look at people who joined the business, stayed a very short amount of time, and then left within a year, perhaps. You could look at the number of people who've been referred to EAP, Employee Assistance Programs. You could look at the number of health and safety incidents that are happening in the business and if there's been a spike in those. You can look at absenteeism, so people who didn't turn up to work, and whether that number is starting to go up, whether it's starting to go up in certain teams, whether it's starting to go up in the organization. You can also start to look at things like people who used to be high performers in your end-of-year talent reviews, or you're in your quarterly talent reviews, or however often you do it, who've suddenly come off the boil. And so there's a lot of metrics that are available if you start digging in the data, knowing what you're looking for, that you can start to assimilate a picture. And my recommendation always is, certainly when we talk to senior leadership teams, is don't look at the averages, don't look at the median across the business, do it business unit by business unit or tier by tier in the business or levels of seniority. Because when we average things, obviously we lose all the granularity in the data. So start to think about where is the data and how do we interrogate it for potential suspected areas of burnout. Hope that answers that question. Another question. Can leaders create a high performance culture that is also burnout resistant? That's a great question. Can leaders create a high performance culture that is also burnout resistant? So it is possible to create a high performance culture that is burnout resilient. I would probably guard myself against saying burnout resistant, because can we all be completely preventative of everything? We don't know if circumstances are going to change. We don't know if there's going to be another global pandemic. We don't know what's going to shift. And that volatility seems to be accelerating, right? So there's lots and lots of things happening around us all the time that I would say, well, maybe not resistant, but definitely resilient. And the difference is resistance is the ability to push back and hold the line. But at some point that resistance might break. Resilience is the ability to bend with the pressure and then come back again. And so what I recommend, and what we certainly work on with leadership programs and organizations, is how do we equip you to run the team no matter what happens around you? So it's not crisis management, but it's new ways of working. And so that high performance culture is able to almost ride the waves rather than drowning in them. You know, it's like surfing versus drowning. Because we want to try and give you the skills that no matter what comes, you can deal with it. And that could be the way we solve problems, the way we make decisions, the way we communicate, the way we set goals, the way we talk to each other, the way we deal with disagreements. There's lots and lots of pieces of the puzzle that can make a big difference. How can leaders encourage risk-taking and innovation in their team members when the risk is too high? How can leaders encourage risk-taking and innovation in their team members when the risk? So I think this relates to that we want to try new things, we want to be curious, we want to explore, but if we get it wrong, then that's the end of our careers. And this is a reality that happens in a lot of organizations. Career limiting decisions, people getting fired because they made a bad choice. And this is often a big mental barrier for people, which causes them to burn out, because one of the key processes that happens in burnout is we've got a big responsibility to change something, but we've got very little ability to actually change it. And we want to try something risky, which is almost like the entrepreneurial, innovative spirit, but we're not allowed to do that. And that can be really, really tough for people to work their way through. What I encourage you to go back to is the idea of the 1% shift. So instead of saying, let's change our entire product suite, or let's take that off the shelf and replace it with this, or let's do a whole new strategy, which is a massive shift, instead take much smaller controlled risks and things that you can control. So maybe instead of changing our entire product, maybe we go and talk to our customers and say, well, what product tweak would be better for you? Maybe instead of doing a whole new strategy, we run a little pilot scheme in a protected area of the business and see what works. Equally, if you're going to take risk, it's important to communicate that you are taking that risk early and why you're taking that risk and what you're hoping to achieve from it. And then do a really rigorous lessons learned activity after you've done it, no matter what happened, whether it was successful or not, to try and make sure that that risk is seen as a learning opportunity. In your team, I do encourage you to try and support your team to take risks. Now, again, this is the idea of letting them graze their knees, not necessarily break their legs. We don't want them to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we do want them to try new things. And the adage that comes up to mind is there's that phrase of, well, what if it goes wrong? This could be career limiting. And my challenge is always, but what if it goes right? Because most of us as leaders have spent most of our careers building up experience through our own battle scars, our own war wounds, our own mistakes, and we've created a paradigm of how it should work. And so when one of our team members comes to us with a zany idea that they've thought, well, what if we tried this? And we're like, no, that won't work, because what if it did? What if they've got a perspective that you haven't got because their background and upbringing is different to yours? What if they suddenly create the next new big thing by trying this? So as a leader, you can support them, you can coach them, you can interrogate their thinking with them, throw it around, almost like put it on a poster and look at it on the wall and look at the poster together and see where the mistakes are. Help them see how this could be an even better idea than what they've come up with, but don't just shoot them down, because that's going to stifle the curiosity. And when people's curiosity is stifled, they tend to shut down productivity, and they won't solve problems for you, which means you end up doing the work even more, which is probably going to contribute to your burnout even more. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that one. I think we'll do one more, and then we will call it a day. What have we got? In your section on strategies for self-care and sustainable success, you mentioned that small things can make a big difference. What are some specific small self-care habits that you recommend? Small self-care habits, my goodness. I love that question. My favorite one is turn your laptop off at 5 p.m, book yourself a personal appointment. That starts to really shift the dial. Put down the alcohol is another one. Start to do a walk. Could you get a 5,000 or a 10,000 step target completed in your day, whether it's getting off the bus one step earlier, parking one multi-story car park further away, doing a walking meeting around the park in the office near you, maybe just taking the stairs down and back to lunch. If you can increase a little bit of exercise and get up to 5,000 or 10,000 steps, then makes a big difference. 10,000 steps is really good for weight control. 5,000 steps is just good for a little bit of cardio work. But those are small micro habits. What we also see when we do a bit of exercise is we push the blood through our brains a bit more actively. So if our blood pressure goes up, it clears that stuff that's clouding our minds out. improves our cardiovascular fitness, helps our immune system. There's a lot of side benefits, but that's a really great habit. Watch your diet would be another one. So if you can eat a little bit healthier, say no to that takeaway, say no to that sausage roll or that pie that you're tempted to because it's quick and easy, and maybe look at something like the old meal prep boxes. So the stuff is delivered to your door, it's in the fridge, and you just have to follow the instructions. And depending on if you like to cook or not, it can be a really lovely thing to do, is to actually make a really yummy, healthy meal. When I burned out, I started on one of those meal prep programs and I lost 25 kilograms in 3 months. The weight just fell off. And that was a combination of reduced stress, reduced alcohol, increased exercise, and really good cooking. So they were the ones that I took on, and they were just small things that I could cope with at a time where I was really mentally drained and burned out. So thank you so much for joining us for the launch of Beat Burnout, Ignite Performance. Once again, if you want to grab the value that is on offer here, please head over to jimmyburrows.com/book and grab yourself the offer that is available for the next 48 hours. It's available for. Please go grab it for yourself. If you want to send that to friends, to colleagues, also please just share that link and they can go there, they can grab their own copy. And if anybody wants to reach out for some support, just wants to have a chat about how they're feeling, or is just struggling to the point where they're kind of feeling like they're on the ledge and they might have to resign, might have to call it a day because they can't see a way through, please reach out to me or my team on LinkedIn and let's have a conversation. Let's help give you a little bit of clarity that's going to make a difference to keep you in work, keep you paying the mortgage, keep feeding the family, and not losing your livelihood just because it's really tough right now. And honestly, I get it. So if you need help, I'm here to support you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for making time and space for me in probably what is a very busy schedule. And I am happy to keep in touch. Take care.